Hey, welcome back to my Sonic Retrospective, where I take a look at every Sonic the Hedgehog game I can get my hands on in order of release. Today we're taking a look at Sonic CD. Sonic's one and only outing on the Sega CD. And incidentally, the first Sonic game ever released on PC. But before we jump into the game, let's take a closer look at Sega's quirky, ill-fated hardware. Back in the early 90s, this newfangled technology called compact disc, or CD as the cool kids called it, was on the rise in popularity.
You want to play a record?
No, Jules, it doesn't play records, it plays CDs. It's a CD player.
It offered a lot more storage for its size than the old microchips that had been used in video game cartridges up to that point. So game developers naturally started to gravitate toward that medium. Sega was far from first out of the gate in developing a CD-based console. By the time the Sega CD was released, there was already the PC Engine CD from NEC, the CD-TV from Commodore, the CDI from Philips, and even Nintendo was in talks with Sony to make a CD-based peripheral, but that's a topic for another video.
Sega originally wanted the Sega CD to be just as powerful as the PC Engine CD, but with twice as much RAM, and sell it for $150. However, this plan kind of fell through as more development was put into the system.
Sega wanted to push for relatively shorter loading times as well as hardware scaling and rotation, similar to Nintendo's Mode 7 graphics. But the Motorola 68000 CPU in the Genesis was not powerful enough to run all this, so they decided to drop another one in the Sega CD itself. Also, upon hearing rumors that NEC would be increasing the RAM available in the PC Engine CD, Sega decided to up the RAM capacity in the Sega CD in response. All of this had the side effect of pushing the cost of the system upwards of $370 US. The problems didn't end there. There was also a lack of communication and a level of mistrust between Sega Japan and Sega of America. Up until the middle of 1991, Sega of America had been kept completely in the dark about details of the Sega CD. And even then, they never received any working prototype units from Japan, leading to a lot of frustration around the office. Sega of America finally put together enough pieces from the dummy units to create their own working prototypes so that they could finally start developing games for the new system.
The decision to not allow Sega of America any working prototypes of the Sega CD seems odd, as the Sega Genesis had a much larger install base in the US than in Japan, meaning a much higher potential for new hardware sales. Of course, this level of miscommunication and distrust would lead to even more problems for Sega down the road, but I'll get to that in another video.
Unfortunately, the frustration at Sega of America was not relieved much as the quality assurance team started running into more problems with the prototypes. The Sega CD was originally designed with a cheap consumer-grade audio CD drive instead of an actual CD-ROM drive, so the team were running into some severe problems with the units. According to former Sega of America senior producer Scott Bayless, some units were literally bursting into flames. Despite its problems, the Sega CD was released in Japan in late 1991 and in the US in late 1992. The new peripheral sold quickly in Japan at first, but because of that small Genesis install base, sales quickly dropped off. Also, it didn't help that Sega took a long time to get development kits out to game companies, resulting in only 2 games being available at launch. The Sega CD had a bit more of a foothold in the US thanks to that larger install base, and helped along by a new advertising campaign. Welko Metot Henix Tlevel, and also an angry black guy.
Hey! You still don't have a Sega CD?
Overall, the Sega CD really was a mixed bag. It did bring things like full motion video to the home console market, for better or worse, and even had a few gems in its library. But it seems people either love or outright hate the Sega CD, and unfortunately the scale is tipped a little more towards the hate side in the general public.
But any home console featuring Marky Mark is fine by me.
Marky Mark, man, that guy sucks.
And of course, one of those Sega CD classics was Sonic CD.
Sega couldn't release a new console without letting their mascot try it out. After the release of the first Sonic game on the Genesis, series lead programmer Yuji Naka was getting kinda tired of the rigid corporate policies at Sega. so he moved to the US along with some other members of Sonic Team to work with Sega Technical Institute on Sonic 2. That left the man who created Sonic himself, Naoto Oshima, in charge of development of Sonic CD. Originally, Sonic 2 and Sonic CD were planned to be the exact same game, but with a lack of communication between the US and Japan offices, Sega CD evolved into something vastly different, with some pretty unique features you won't see anywhere else in the series. The story this time around is big enough to have 2 whole pages in the instruction manual here. Sonic comes across a little planet called Little Planet that appears over this random lake only on the last day of the year. Apparently he's being followed around by Princess Sally.
Princess Sally. This is Princess Sally. Or, wait. Oh wait, no, this is Princess Sally. Or maybe that's Princess Sally. I guess she does kind of come in different flavors. But anyway, that's fucking Amy.
Little Planet is home to the legendary Time Stones, which will serve as the Chaos Emerald replacement for this game. And of course, Robotnik manages to get his hands on them. Using the Time Stones to travel through time, Robotnik conquers Little Planet and turns it into the robotic utopia of his dreams. Sonic still has a problem with this, so of course he moves in to ruin Robotnik's day.
Right off the bat, this definitely feels like a Sonic game.
You can kind of tell that this was built off of Sonic 1, as it doesn't seem to have that sense of speed that Sonic 2 has. And they obviously reused the Sonic 1 sprite.
This is by no means a bad thing. Sonic 1's overall feel was damn near perfect, and more of that can only be good.
The spin dash returns in this game, though a bit less flashy than Sonic 2, as the Sonic 1 sprite didn't have an animation for it. However, Sonic has a brand new move in his repertoire that even has its own new animation, the patented figure 8 leg spin, or super peel out, depending on whether or not you've read the comic. A move that was not seen again until the now classic Sonic the Hedgehog issue number 25, which adapted the story for Sonic CD. Basically, you can do either move from a standstill by pressing down and tapping the jump buttons for spin dash, or using up for the figure 8. The figure 8 move gets you a bit more speed and will kick in automatically if you hit a strong spring or run through some other sort of speed launcher. And speed is very important in this game, as it's the key to the game's other big feature, time travel.
Of course you can't have a story with things called time stones and not have some sort of time travel reference. And it's here that the Sega CD really shows its power.
Sonic starts off each level in the present, obviously, and like always, he must make his way to Robotnik in the final zone. Scattered throughout each stage are these time posts. Some take you to the future and some to the past. Once you run past one of these posts, you get a cool robotic voice sample. If you keep up your speed for long enough, you'll get all sparkly, and eventually get a cool time travel transition to a whole new level.
That's right, the first 2 acts of every zone is basically 4 different levels.
You have the present, the past, a bad future, and a good future. Every time period has its own graphics, color palette, music, and even the layout changes a bit. Even the enemies have different looks depending on the time period. In the present, they look pretty normal. In the past, they look shinier and newer, and are even a little more difficult due to being new. And in the future, they're dilapidated and broken from disrepair.
Like every other Sonic game, this game has a good ending and a bad ending. However, Sonic CD gives you 2 ways to get the good ending.
There's the classic way, collecting all 6 of the Time Stones, or using the time travel posts to travel back into the past to destroy Robotnik's roboticizing machines. In the past, you'll also find some propaganda holograms of Metal Sonic tormenting some of the animals, which is kind of dark when you really think about it. If you manage to either grab the Time Stone or destroy the roboticizers in Act 1 and 2, then Act 3 will be in the good future and the fight with Robotnik will be much easier. Getting the good future in each zone will get you the good ending, however there's an extra bonus you get for collecting all the Time Stones. The fights with Robotnik at the end of each level feel a lot different from the previous games, which is another big clue that the game was not made by the core Sonic team. It only takes 3 hits to defeat Robotnik, and in a couple of encounters you don't even really fight him. The fights really aren't that hard, and the real challenge of the game is getting the Time Stones or getting to the past to destroy Robotnik's machines.
As expected, the game looks beautiful. I know I've said that about pretty much every game so far, and you'd think that would get old, but the art design team really do know how to make pleasing visuals.
Even though the Sega CD didn't really expand the color capabilities of the Genesis, the art team still managed to impress with bright, colorful stages that just pop off the screen. The Sega CD also gave the Genesis the ability of hardware scaling and rotation of sprites and graphics, similar to the Mode 7 on the Super Nintendo, which can be seen in the main menu and put to good use in the special stages.
While I do like the visual style of the game, I really don't like the level layouts at all.
I said in previous reviews that the best designs are built to balance Sonic's top speed and slowing down to make some of the more tricky jumps. But the game should still have a flow and keep you going in the right direction. There are a lot of sections where the layout doesn't really make sense and makes navigating kind of frustrating. There's lots of alternate paths, which by itself is a good thing, but the way to get to them and where those paths lead are never obvious or conveyed properly. There's even some instances where rings are placed inside the level architecture. It really looks out of place and is frustrating given the importance of rings in Sonic games. The increased memory of the Sega CD made for some much larger level design than what was previously possible, but it's almost as if they made the levels too big. There's a lot of open space and verticality to all the levels, but it's hard to keep up. It almost feels like playing on a Game Gear, as the viewing area doesn't really give you enough visual information to properly plan your route or react to hazards. And like I said, a lot of open space, with almost no point of reference for where you are or where you're going. It's like trying to enjoy a painting while looking through a microscope. But hey, what you can see looks amazing.
The first thing you see when you turn on the game is this cool animation of Sonic running through some mountains and valleys on his way to Little Planet.
Yet another area where the Sega CD excelled, full motion video, which was almost unheard of on home consoles previously, except for maybe one or two exceptions.
This makes Sonic CD the first Sonic game with animated cutscenes. That animation looks pretty good, don't it?
Well, the reason it looks so good is because it was produced by the legendary anime studio Toei Animation.
If you're unclear of who that is, let me name off just a few of the shows that they've created.
Cutie Honey, Galaxy Express 999, Fist of the North Star, the Dragon Ball series, Sailor Moon, Digimon, Toriko, the list goes on. The animation production was also done in cooperation with the now defunct animation studio, Studio Junio. Not much is known about Studio Junio, other than the fact that they have worked with Toei and TMS on several projects such as Neon Genesis Evangelion, Ghost in the Shell, Rurouni Kenshin, Trigun, and even some episodes of Batman the Animated Series, including the acclaimed Baby Doll.
So yeah, there's an interestingly high caliber of production behind these little pieces of animation for a Sonic game.
Interesting note, even though the animation studios knew that the Sega CD would only play back the animation at 12 frames per second, they still animated it at 30 frames per second. To put that into perspective, most TV shows are done at 12 frames per second, and even the smooth animation that you see in the 2D Disney movies is only 24 frames per second. You can actually see the animation in its original 30 frames per second on the Sonic Gems collection for the GameCube and in the Steam version.
Finally, that brings us to that big old can of worms that is the soundtrack. Of course, another big advantage to the CD format is CD quality music, which allows for actual instrumentation of your music instead of just samples and waveforms.
The original soundtrack was composed by Naofumi Hataya and Masafumi Ogata, with vocals for the title track and credits music provided by J-pop artist Keiko Utoko. Keiko even provided the speaking voice for Sonic in this game, interestingly making this game the first time Sonic ever spoke English. When Sonic gets an extra life, he'll say, "Yes! Yes!" And if you let him idle for 3 minutes straight, he will jump off the level saying, "I'm out of here! I'm out of here!" And you get an immediate game over, no matter how many lives you had left.
Originally, Hataya and Ogata created tracks for the present versions of each stage, then remixed them for the past, good future, and bad future, keeping the same overall theme, but changing the mood to fit the time period. This gave the soundtrack a very coherent sound for each level.
But Sega of America wasn't having none of that. When the game came over to the American shores, Sega of America had the head of their sound department, Spencer Nielsen, along with David Young, recompose all of the CD audio tracks, which means that the present and both futures of each level all got brand new music, along with the title theme and credits music.
It's a supersonic flight, gotta keep it going.
Having pretty much grown up with the US version of the game, I always wondered why the past music always sounded so vastly different from the rest of the soundtrack.
Well, the reason for that is because the past tracks were hard-coded into the game as PCM audio, much like the programmed music in Genesis and Super Nintendo games, and much harder to replace than CD audio tracks. There has been a lot of speculation about why the soundtrack was changed, but the most likely reason is the Saturday morning Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon. The cartoon series was already in production and even released just 1 month before the game hit the US. Tying the game to the show seems to be the best answer for why the soundtrack was changed, especially when you consider that the American soundtrack is a bit darker in tone overall, even in the good future tracks. And especially that boss music. Pure nightmare fuel and awesomeness. And it would also explain why they changed Amy's name to Princess Sally. Overall, I don't really know which soundtrack I like best. There's tracks on both sides that I like and dislike. I also really like that they used PCM audio for the past stages. Since it's made from the sound chip and not CD audio, it actually has this aged feel to it, almost like going back and listening to vinyl after listening to a CD. These PCM tracks also showcase the increased power of the sound chip that the Sega CD provides. The samples are much better, and the music seems to have a bit more depth. If I had to choose a side, I would have to go with the US soundtrack. If only because I think Sonic Boom is a much better song than Sonic You Can Do Anything, or as it's colloquially known, Toot Toot Sonic Warrior. I love the melody. I mean, it's basically a remix of the Green Hills Zone of 8-Bit Sonic 2, one of my favorite music tracks from that game. But really? Toot Toot Sonic Warrior? I also find it kind of funny how people poke fun when Americanized anime throws in some random rap song.
We find out about a treasure in the Grand Line, there's no doubt. The pirate who's
Yet people like this.
Excalibur! It's about that bar. What do you mean? Give and take. Going home. Side zone. Check it out, eh? Live alone.
But yeah, I don't care what anyone says, Sonic Boom is the better theme. And it works so well as a slow rock song over the credits too. Backed up by amazing vocals from the jazz band For Hire, Pastiche. I'm not sure where to rank this one with the previous games. There are a lot of quirks in this game that make it obvious that it wasn't developed by the core Sonic team. Plus the lack of Tails and Super Sonic seems a little odd, just after playing Sonic 2. Plus the level layout is frustrating at times, and the subpar disk drive causes a bit of lag sometimes when the music needs to change for things like speed shoes or invincibility. But the game looks beautiful, and the music is awesome no matter which region you live in. Plus a couple staple characters were added to the cast of the franchise, Metal Sonic and Amy. At this point in history, even a subpar Sonic game was still pretty great. And this game almost single-handedly justified purchasing a Sega CD back in 1993. Nowadays, if you don't have a Sega CD, there's still lots of ways to play this. But honestly, I would go with the Christian Whitehead version on Xbox Live, iOS, Android, and Steam. This version has full widescreen support, runs at 60 frames per second, allows you to choose between the Japanese and US soundtracks at any time, and you get to see the animated cutscenes in their full screen 30 FPS glory.
It's a supersonic flight, gotta keep it going.
Even though though Sonic CD is not quite as good as the main Genesis titles, it's still worth checking out. But don't take my word for it.